Good day, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Manufacturing Think Tank with Cliff Waldman. I'm Cliff Waldman. I'm the host of the show, one of many on Manufacturing Talk Radio. And welcome to the great Manufacturing Talk Radio AI episode. It would be hard to imagine a technology that has exploded onto the scene more quickly or with more intensity than artificial intelligence. And today we have the perfect guest, a former Obama advisor on technology, to talk to us about something that is creating trepidation and fear and exercising the imagination of the whole world. I'm delighted to be joined by Robert Seamans. He has footprints firmly both in New York and Washington. He's an associate professor at NYU Stern School of Business, and he's a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Teaches courses in game theory and strategy, and his research has focused on how firms use technology in their strategic interactions with each other. And he also focuses in the more macro sense of the economic consequences of AI, and to some extent we'll be talking about that, as well as robotics and other advanced technologies. I'm pleased to say that Rob organized an excellent conference on robotics and to some extent AI, which was held in Washington. I thank him for inviting me. It was quite a fascinating set of discussions, and some of what we're going to talk about on the show were frankly motivated by lunch and break discussions that we had at the conference. His research is skyrocketing. It's been published in leading academic journals. He's been cited in numerous media outlets, The Atlantic, Forbes, the Harvard Business Review, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and others. And as I just mentioned, in 2000, recognition pays off. In 2015, Professor Siemens was appointed as the senior economist for technology and innovation on President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. Rob, welcome to the think tank. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to this. I'm glad that, first of all, I was very happy that you were able to attend that event that we had in Washington, D.C., and I'm glad that it was so generative to your thinking on this topic.
It was. You know, every discussion at that conference and every discussion I hear or read about AI so far seems to center around fear. And we're going to talk. The first question is about fear. Is it overdone? Do you generally, what I'm really asking is, do you generally view this technology as having more potential harm than benefit?
Yes, this topic comes up a lot. So my answer is no. I mean, I don't think that there's more harm than benefits. But let me sort of say a little bit more on that. So I guess up until about a month ago, I feel like most of what I've read is a lot of fear about AI taking jobs. I think that fear is way overdone. And hopefully we can talk in more detail about that as the show progresses today. But I think the effect of AI on jobs is largely going to be an augmenting type of effect. I do get a little bit worried, though, when it comes to things like the effect of AI on misinformation and disinformation, the role that AI can play in terms of like cybersecurity and things like that. So I do think there's definitely the potential for some very big harms. I do worry about that. The other thing I worry about is to the extent that we start to very clearly identify harms, do we have the political wherewithal to sort of put in place regulations and policies and whatnot to address those harms? And that I've become more skeptical of, although perhaps it's just this moment in time where it seems like Republicans and Democrats in Washington can't come to agreements around important pressing topics.
Yes, yes, indeed. You know, in some ways you anticipated my second question, but I'm going to bring forth the point anyway. In the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, John Maynard Keynes referred to technological unemployment as if it were sort of a natural economic phenomenon. Um, is AI? So I'm going to ask the question in a different way. Every technology, robotics, 3D printing, cars, has at its inception created fears of technological unemployment. That to some extent it replaces maybe not a human being, but it replaces a human skill. It replaces a human task. So is assuming that AI is going to have its disruption on the labor market, is it going to, do you think it's going to be worse than the average disruption? Or how about let's take the other side. Is it going to create new skills demands and eventually create new jobs, but just very new jobs that demand very new skills? It could be either side, I would imagine.
Yeah, my take is that it's much more sort of the latter part of what you were talking about. Yeah, it's possible that there'll be some jobs that will disappear as a result of AI. It's possible, in fact, it's likely that there'll be new jobs that are created as a result of AI. But really, where I think the bulk of what we're going to see is most of our current jobs will remain, but what it is that we do in our jobs is going to change. In some cases, it'll change just in very small ways. In other cases, it'll change in probably pretty dramatic ways. But I think it's the cases where AI would eliminate a job. I think we're talking about really, really small numbers of jobs. And so I'm not at all worried about it. You started by mentioning about Keynes's article, and I forget what it was, 1920 or 1930 or so. I don't have that handy, so I don't have the article, the part of the article that I want to refer to. But as I recall, he's skeptical that his grandkids would even need to work. I think he brings that up in his article. So he was a great economist, right? But even great economists can be wrong. And this is an example or a case where he was wrong, right? I mean, his kids and grandkids and great grandkids, for that matter, still need to work. There's been obviously a lot of technological change, a lot of technological advancements and improvements since he wrote that article a century ago. And yet there's still lots and lots of work. You look at the unemployment rate and it's really, really low. Why? Because there's lots of work out there for folks to do. Again, jobs have changed over that really long time period, and I expect that jobs will change again in the future as more and more businesses and organizations start using AI.
Let's get into some manufacturing specifics, and it's no secret to anybody that supply chains have been in turmoil in recent years, largely due to the pandemic. Can AI help us with that? Can AI be an asset to, let's say, a manufacturing company struggling to create an optimal supply chain configuration? A lot of manufacturing companies, think of the larger ones, are going to have to put their supply chains back together again in this post-pandemic world, and they're going to have to make very basic decisions on what an optimal supply chain configuration looks like for them in the basic world. Do they keep them global? Do they pull them in to make them more regional? There's a lot of quantitative there's some judgment, there's a quantitative calculations there. Can AI help with that? Can AI be an asset for that?
So I think the short answer is yes, right? I mean, so what AI is really, really good at is prediction. And when I think about supply chain issues, I think about, of course, there is, let's think about physical goods. Has the physical good been produced yet or not? But conditional on it being produced, and really the issue is getting it from one place to another, and predicting the amount of time it would take, or trying to understand what your demand might look like in the future so that you could let your suppliers know that they need to start supplying you with some of the inputs you're going to need. AI is going to be really, really helpful for both of those things. And so I feel like supply chain is actually one of those areas where we're actually going to see AI be really, really helpful in terms of helping to reduce some of the disruptions that we've seen. Now, that's sort of in a perfect world, if you will. This isn't to say that there aren't going to be huge supply chain issues in the future, even though we have AI. It's still possible that we will, especially if you see more let's say like wars or natural disasters or things like that, that perhaps are going to be very hard to predict, right? So to the extent that we have more of those things, we are going to have then even more supply chain disruptions, and AI is not going to be able to solve that.
Another concern, and for the economy as a whole, but certainly for the manufacturing sector, is labor productivity growth. Now, it's very volatile. There's a theory of that it's not just secular, but there's productivity cycling. So it can be hard to look at the secular trend. But even all that being said, it's pretty clear that since the end of the financial crisis of 2007 to 2010, we have a productivity weakness problem. It is a concern, and it's certainly a concern in manufacturing. Do you think eventually, after adaptation takes place, that AI can be a productivity enhancing technology? Will we see AI, to sort of misquote a number of economists, will we see AI eventually in the productivity statistics?
Yes, I think that we will. I think that we'll look back, hopefully 10 years in the future. Certainly, I would imagine within 20 years, and we'll look to this time period as being a time period where we really just start to see the ways in which AI is improving labor productivity growth. I'm excited about that. I mean, I tend to be sort of a techno optimist, and part of the reason why I am is because I believe that AI is going to help to enhance productivity. Now, one of the issues is, I mean, it's fine to say, yes, I think that it will be productivity enhancing, but I guess the bigger question is by how much. So we already, I think we all already experience many of the ways in which AI can be helpful. I have my, I'm holding up my iPhone right here. So Cliff, you can see it. One of the things I love about my iPhone is how I can use any of the various types of maps that are in there to try to quickly figure out how to get from point A to point B here in Manhattan, and whether it'll be quicker by walking or by subway or by car, which, for any one of those, which routes are going to be most efficient. Or if I'm leaving the city and I'm going, say, to visit in-laws in New Jersey, which tunnel is going to be the best one to take in terms of cutting down my travel time and things like that. All of that is made possible by AI, together with some other technology as well. So we already are seeing enhancements to productivity. What I think we're waiting for, though, is some sort of like I call it a killer app, okay, of some sort. At one point, I was pretty optimistic that autonomous vehicles might be one of those killer apps. So autonomous vehicles, will and do rely on a wide variety of technologies, but one of which is artificial intelligence. To the extent that autonomous vehicles become widespread, and it'll probably take decades before that happens, but to the extent that they do, and or once they do, that is potentially a killer app that then leads to lots and lots of changes in our economy that, again, I feel like will help boost productivity. So that'd be one example of sort of a killer app. Another might be in medicine or something like that, predictive medicine or something like that, that benefits all of us. But so I think we're going to see AI in lots of little ways, like mapping software or predictive typing and things like that. However, I really do think we're waiting to see some of the big ways in which AI gets used.
For the benefit of our audience, I think it's important this is a point that I've made on previous shows, but I think it's important, bears repeating. There's really only two things. There's only two things that matter that input into long-term economic growth. One is the growth of labor productivity, and the other is the growth of labor hours. The growth of labor hours, at least in the U.S. and Western economies, is going to slow. Birth rates and fertility rates are falling. We expect that to continue. It puts more pressure on productivity to be the thing that juices, the only thing left that juices our long-term economic growth, and therefore our prosperity, our employment prospects, and all that. So when Professor Siemens is talking about the possibility of AI being a plus for productivity, that's a significant statement about the technology and how any technology and how important it is to use it and to use it for its benefit. Now, there's going to be some learning curve, Rob. Or will AI be a negative before it becomes a positive for productivity? And what I'm thinking about specifically is computers in the 1990s. There were there were lessons to be learned. We didn't do it right at first, and computers sort of held us back for a while until they became acclimated into our everyday service and production process. And now it's hard to imagine economic activity without computers. You think we're going to go through the same thing where this, AI is going to be kicking and spitting for a while until it really becomes fully acclimated into our economic activity?
Yes, that would be my bet. So you mentioned computers, and I appreciate the history lesson there, and I'll provide another history lesson as well for your listeners. This is an example that's due to Paul David. He was an economic historian at Stanford University. He was studying U.S. manufacturing firms in the early 20th century, most of them based in the Midwest. They were all running off of steam power at the time, and then what he was studying is how long it took for them to see productivity gains once they switched from steam power to electricity power. And it took on average 5 years. Some were able to get productivity gains more quickly. Many, it actually took many more years than 5 years, but on average 5 years. And the reason for that is that you can't just take out one technology, right? You can't just like unplug the steam, if you will, and then plug in the electricity. It takes a lot of tinkering and experimentation to figure out how to set up your production lines to take advantage of what electricity can do well, right? So again, I think when you look at the history of these new technologies, you mentioned computers. We could look further back in time at early electrification. It always takes time before you start to see a productivity boost from the new technologies. I think exactly the same thing is going to play out with AI. And actually, one thing I worry a little bit about is I worry that firms might not have the patience in some cases to wait to see the benefits. You could imagine a firm sort of investing in some new AI system or something, not seeing the gains right away and saying, you know what, this doesn't do anything for us. When in fact, if firms just stick at it for a little bit, do a little bit more experimentation, oftentimes needing to invest in more complementary assets. That could be physical assets, could be software, digital assets, almost always involves human capital assets. Once you make those investments and experiment around, a little bit more, then firms will probably see the productivity growth that they were hoping for.
Let's switch to education. Education and all the discussions about education have been front page news lately, as to what's needed, what's important, the return on education. Of course, this is right in your circle, being an educator. So I'm going to ask, how do you believe that AI is going to change the educational needs and demands of the U.S. economy generally and the U.S. manufacturing sector specifically?
Yeah, so this is a very big question, and we could spend a really long time on this, but let me try to briefly sort of touch on a few things. I want to link back to to the earlier remark that you made about AI maybe replacing some jobs, maybe creating new jobs, and as I was saying, sort of in all likelihood, just changing a lot of the way that we do our current jobs. So if you can imagine, now imagine sort of the education associated with each of those three buckets. So in the case of AI replacing jobs, there are going to be educational needs there. Those individuals that lost their jobs are going to need to be retrained. So that's sort of one bucket, if you will. There are going to be new jobs that are created that we can't even anticipate right now. We're going to have to develop entire education programs to support those new jobs. So that's yet another bucket. But again, the biggest bucket, I think, is just going to be the way that AI changes the way that we do all of our jobs. And so for that bucket, it's going to really require reimagining the way that we educate our students. And a lot of this is going to be sort of sector specific, right? So a student going into arts or fine arts, that's going to look like the way that training will change in that sector is going to be very different than the way that training will change in, say, someone who goes into statistics or something like that, or software development and coding. AI is going to impact all of these sectors, but it's going to impact them in very different ways. And so the way that we're going to have to change education, again, it's just going to be very sort of sector specific or almost occupation specific. Now, one of the things that I'm excited about is that potentially one of the benefits of AI is that in principle, it can help an educator, right? So someone like me, fine tune the education that I give to my students. In some cases, maybe even really personalize education to one student, depending on what it is that they're trying, depending on their background and the skills that they already have and where they're trying to go, a little bit differently than I would for for another student. Right now, the way I teach is I have a class of, it could vary between, let's say 10 to 70 students, depending on the topic and the semester and things like that. But it's the same material that I teach to everybody. You could imagine a version of this where I, still can continue to teach maybe half of the same material to everybody, but then thanks to AI, I'm able to specialize what I teach or personalize what I teach in a little bit more detail to all of those students. Again, I don't quite know what that looks like. We as educators right now, we're a little bit shocked by how quickly ChatGPT and other large language modelers have come onto the scene. But speaking for myself and other educators that I talk to, we are playing around with the technology. We're trying to figure out ways in which we can use it to help us do our job.
Let's think global for a second. More and more, particularly in the manufacturing sector, the lines between domestic and global activity are just getting more and more blurry. What do you think the global impact of AI on trade and supply chains is it going to be? Will global manufacturing is competition? We've had constant discussions on this show and many other places on manufacturing competition between countries, jobs here versus jobs there. I've always maintained that's an illusory choice. Because of the way supply chains work, that for certain companies, for certain products, that strength in Fuzhou, China, can create jobs in Canton, Ohio, and that's the reality of how supply chains work. But in terms of global competition, the normal talk about our jobs versus their jobs, is an AI disrupted world going to see global competition change? Is it going to be different?
So I don't think so. Coming back to a comment or maybe a question that you had earlier about the effect of AI on supply chains. I mean, I do think that AI will be very beneficial for supply chains, and so that then suggests that the globalization trend that we have seen, we will continue to see. I do think that's true. I think that there's been some talk over the last couple of years about globalization, being dead or something like that. I don't think that's true at all. I think there's still lots of gains to trade, and I think we will continue to see that. So I think that we will continue to see increasing globalization and distributed supply chains, and AI will help with all of that. However, in terms of the effect on competition between, and I think here you mean sort of like national competition,
right?
Yeah.
U.S. versus Mexico, U.S. versus Canada,
right? U.S. versus China, for that matter, right?
Right.
I mean, yeah. So I don't think that has much to do with AI. I don't. Let's put it this way. I don't see AI impacting that much, if at all. It's possible, of course, that growing sort of national competition might have a negative effect on the globalization trends that I was talking about. But I don't think that AI really plays much into this.
Final question for Rob Seamans, and let me sort of tell you why I'm answering this question. We've had concerns about technological competition before, where there's been concerns that China's ahead of us. in terms of robotics implementation. We've seen the ability, because of technology, to bring the very beleaguered apparel sector home, because we can make apparel more efficiently now with certain, if we implement certain technologies, we have a smart policy about doing that. So I'm going to end with the stick here rather than the carrot, and ask you the simple question. Are countries that fail to fully implement AI in the way that they should be competitively with other countries, are they going to lose manufacturing jobs because of that?
I think so. You're causing me to speculate a little bit, and as not as an educator, but as a researcher, I like to be able to look at the data and speak to what I know.
Sure.
And here I'm getting out of my the zone of what I know. So I'm going to say I think so. And in order to back that up, I'm going to lean on what I know. And so here's what I know. So you mentioned robots. So this is still an area where people are actively doing research, and so we haven't quite figured this out, but all of the research on the economics of robots suggests that firms that adopt robots see increasing employment and increasing growth, right, in terms of revenue growth. The firms that don't, they shrink and they die, right? So I think if we, I think with that in mind, if we think about this now more at sort of like a national level, and let's stick with robots, I think it'd be reasonable to generalize and say that countries that invest more in robots are going to be the countries that grow more and do better. I think the same is probably going to be true of AI, right? I think that firms that implement AI in their manufacturing sectors, just like countries that invest in robots in their manufacturing sectors, are going to be the ones that see more growth instead of less growth.
Rob Siemans, you gave us your time. You gave us your considerable expertise. Thank you so much for joining me today for such a critical discussion.
Thank you, Cliff. Pleasure to see you virtually, and always a pleasure to talk with you about these important topics. Thank you.
Thank you. And for our viewers, it is a 100% certainty that we will be talking about this again, because it is a story just at its infancy, and it will grow and it will change, and there will be challenges that none of us will anticipate, and we will revisit this over again. I don't think I've ever seen, I've been through technology changes. This one is really quite remarkable. So until the next episode, I'll just say we look forward to seeing you the next time.